This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
I'm a huge fan of this lady. I shouldn't call her a lady, this young woman, Danielle Moodie. Because for some reason, I think, well, you're a woman. If I called you a really wonderful lady, does that make you feel old, lady?
No. I see. You have to just ask people, but I'm never offended. So I like it.
That voice belongs to Danielle Moodie. She is fantastic. I've been with her on MSNBC a number of times. Everybody needs to follow her on Twitter at D2Cents, DEE 2 cents. She is like the host and the co-host of like 39 different podcasts. I'm kidding. She's the host of Woke as Fuck Daily podcast. She's the co-host of the New Abnormal podcast, and she's also the co-host of Democracy-ish. Danielle, thank you. We live in really crazy times where in this age of Trump, you and I are kind of like, even if we disagree politically, we're like on the same side of a lot of shit, which is fascinating. But hello, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you.
Hey, I'm an old white dude, and I have always been obsessed with the issue of race. And plenty of times I've stepped in it when it comes to race. But Danielle, my thesis has always been that too many people are afraid to talk about race. And I think white people, me, and a bunch of us have a lot to learn about the issue of race. I wanted to bring you on to have probably something we disagree with, but an interesting conversation. I want to get your take on this question. Can Black people be racist? Or maybe another way to phrase that, is there such a thing as racism against white people? Take a first stab at that and let's get into it. Can Danielle, and it's always so good to see you, and I love watching you on TV, can Black people become racist? Can they be racist? Give me your take.
Okay. So I've been thinking about this since you asked me to come on. And my reaction is no. And I will go into the reason why, right? Racism is a construct that was created and built by white people, right? Racism is a construct that was created in order to dehumanize and minimize Black people and then other people of color, right? The idea of race is a creation. It is made up, right? And the idea of it has to work with our hierarchy, our system. Now, we in the United States like to believe that we don't live in a caste system like they do in India and in other countries, but we absolutely do. Our caste system, regardless of what it is that we think happened with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and with different acts that desegregated this country, that stopped Jim Crow, we have seen and continue to live inside of the remnants of a racist society that we refuse to reckon with, and at this very time have decided that we are going to erase that history, that truth altogether, right?
How do you, Danielle, how do you define, and I'll start with my definition, like, how do you define racism? To me, racism is holding a negative view about someone because of their race. Like, I hate you because you're Black. You hate me because I'm white. To me, that's racism. But how would you define racism?
To me, racism is about power. Racism is about the idea that everything, every system should be centered around and for the privilege and benefit of white people, right? And anything that moves outside of that power structure, any move to create more equanimity, any move to create equity in any fashion, is seen and is dealt with as a problem. right? And what I find the trouble that we have is that we make racism solely about race, solely about color, when it is absolutely and 100% about power. And it is about the preservation of white power and white supremacy in this country. And that's the reason why I feel like when you ask that question, because it's a valid question, I have seen other conversations with Black people themselves. Because Black people are not a monolith. Just because I am saying that I don't believe that Black people can be racist, it does not mean that other Black people hold the same sentiment. So I just want your audience to be aware of that. It's not, we're not one ball of brown Play-Doh, right? There are variations in thought and religion and, in identity and all of these things that have us come to this understanding and idea. But for me, as a student of politics, as somebody who has been steeped in history and learning, my analysis and understanding is that no, that Black people can't be racist. That doesn't mean that they can't hold prejudices. But when you're talking about racist, no, I don't believe so.
So Danielle, hit me over the head if I'm paraphrasing you wrong. Generally, broadly, the reason you think Black people cannot be racist is because they're not in a position of power. So like you can be prejudiced, but if you don't have the power to act on your prejudice, then you can't be racist. Like you're not in a position of power.
Correct. So say I am I work at a bank, right? Just to use like basic understanding that people can wrap their minds around. A white person in power at a bank, which we all know it's called redlining, has the power and the ability based on their prejudice to act on that prejudice by denying loans, right? By denying entry into universities, by denying service in hospitals, by denying entry into the public school system, but by denying entry into restaurants, right? Mm-hmm. Black people have never held that kind of power in this country, ever, right? And so while I'm not saying that, Black people can't be prejudiced and can't hold different prejudicial views, no, that you absolutely can. But can they weaponize those views in terms of systemically moving people to facilities, industries, or what have you? No, they cannot.
So what if, and Danielle, maybe this is crazy and it doesn't make sense. Like, what if you had a Black executive at a bank, the top person at the bank was a Black executive, and that Black executive, and by the way, so I completely agree with you when it comes to systemic racism, redlining, and all the rest. What would you call a Black bank president who went out of her way to make it harder for white people to get loans? Would you call an anomaly? That? Well, no, clearly, no doubt, and I agree. Like weird, like that doesn't happen. But like Danielle, and I know it would be. I'll
go on. Let me go on the walk.
But if it happened, wouldn't that be an act of racism?
Well, I mean, I would go one step further and be like, most banks have boards and shareholders, and the idea that one CEO or head of said bank would have the ability and the power to wield that power again, no, because the idea that there wouldn't be a board, shareholders, and other people that are going to be answered to, and the probability of said board being all Black or all people of color for that bank, doubtful.
And Danielle, I hear you, and I agree. It would be an anomaly. But if you had a Black bank president who rightly was pissed off about the years of redlining and discrimination against Black Americans when it comes to getting loans and getting housing and all the rest, so she assumed this position of power, and she did whatever she could to balance the scales and make it more difficult for white people. And let's say the board discovered it and whatever. But the simple act of what she was doing, you wouldn't call racism.
No, I would call it the weaponization of her job, right? Because again, we're making a one-on-one comparison to a system-wide issue, right? To a country-wide issue. So can one person weaponize a position of power that they may be in? Absolutely, right? And discriminate against a white person if they are a person of color or a Black person? Yes, they can. But when I'm talking about walking down Main Street to 2, 3, 4 different banks, when I'm, talking about being denied 1, 2, 3, 10 different jobs, right? When we have stories every couple of years, every couple of years, there's always a story that is